Chapter 546. Ugh. A groan escaped from my mouth as I thought about asking Octavius for help. Out of all individuals, it had to be him. Just my luck. Glancing Douglas's way, I sighed before asking. How sure are you that he can help? I'm fairly confident. Caressing his beard, Douglas slowly said. He also seems to have had a problem with his soul, so if there is anyone you should ask, it should be him. Ugh. Letting out another groan, I leaned back on the chair and sighed. It doesn't look like I have another option. Things had just turned a lot more problematic. To be honest, I didn't really want to see him. However, because this was one of my top priorities at the moment, I really didn't have much choice. Somehow in some way I had to meet him. This is the only way I can finally regain my memories before reincarnation, and dispel my other self's influence. Although just a hypothesis for now. After my soul healed completely, I believed all my memories of the future would disappear and my old ones would reappear. Not only that, but I would also know which feelings of mine were real and which ones were fake. I think I've answered your question. Do you need something else? Jolting me out of my thoughts was Douglas's voice. Turning to look at him, I thought for a moment before answering. Remember how you told me you would allow me to take anything from the cube? Ah. Douglas looked at me with a sudden look of understanding. I see what you're aiming for. Taking a small tablet from his table, Douglas stroked his beard before pressing it to activate the hologram. Following his actions, a series of different items present themselves before me. Extending his hand, Douglas smiled. Here is the catalog of what we have stored inside of the cube. Choose whatever you want. Looking at Douglas, I squinted my eyes while studying the catalog. Am I allowed to pick an ranked skill? In response to my gaze, the hand that caressed his beard froze slightly. With a rather complicated look on his face, he eventually nodded his head. I did say that you could take anything you wanted, so I guess I should keep my word. Take whatever you want. Pausing for a moment, his face became sterner. But let me remind you, Ren. You shouldn't choose a skill just because of its rank. Choose a skill that you need the most at the moment. Okay. Firmly nodding my head, I started to scroll the catalog. Just like Douglas said, I couldn't be too greedy. That said, now that I had his approval, I wasn't going to be courteous with my choice either. Since I was allowed to take an ranked skill, I wasn't going to shy away from it. If it proved to be useful, I was definitely going to take it. Pressing the skills section, I quickly got to work. Let's see. Let's go. In a slick suit, Edward calmly waited at the house's entrance for Amanda, who was currently changing. This is it. Today was an important day. After leaving for 4 years, Edward was finally going to return to his guild. Visit. For the best no_underfruit_g experience. There was no doubt that his appearance would shake the entire human domain. It was at this moment that the door to Amanda's room suddenly opened. In a beautiful formal dress that accentuated her curves, Amanda walked towards her father. With a smile on his face, Edward asked, "Do you have everything ready?" "Yes." Amanda nodded her head with a serious look. "Have fun, you two." From the other side of the apartment, a cheerful voice echoed as Natasha stared at them with a warm smile. "Don't come back too late, I will get lonely." "We won't." Taking a step to the side, Edward opened the apartment door and allowed Amanda to leave first. "Thank you." As soon as she walked out, he waved at Natasha one more time before closing the door. "I'll see you later. Don't come back too late." Let's go." After closing the door, he walked towards the elevator in the distance. In place of his former cheerful demeanor, he adopted an imposing one. Now that he had left his apartment, he was no longer Edward Stern, but the guild master of the Demon Hunter Guild. He had to adopt the right demeanor to suit his position. This was especially so given the current situation at the Demon Hunter Guild. He had only been briefed a little bit by Natasha, but the more he heard, the more displeased he was. People seemed to have forgotten what made the Demon Hunter Guild the world's top guild. "It's fine. I'll quickly make them understand once I return." Clenching his fist tightly, Edward entered the elevator with his daughter. Dad." Snapping Edward out of his thoughts was Amanda's voice. Edward's face immediately softened. "What is it, Amanda? You can ask me anything." Lowering her head a little, Amanda asked in a rather hushed tone. "I didn't really hear it properly yesterday, but how did you meet Ren?" "Huh." Her words instantly caused Edward to feel an ominous premonition as he warily asked. Why are you asking about him? I'm just curious, Amanda said as her face remained stoic. Furrowing his brows tightly, Edward carefully looked at his daughter. Staring back at him and seeing her stubbornness, he eventually relented and started talking to her about his experiences with Rin back in the demon world. We met when I was inside of the arena. If I don't recall incorrectly, he went to meet me because. And so, Edward began to recount to Amanda his experience with Rin in the demon world throughout their trip to the guild. From how he met him to what happened after and how he saved him. Throughout the entire time, Amanda had an attentive look on her face as she listened to every single one of his words. Her eyes twinkled strangely as Edward spoke, but Edward wasn't sure what it meant, so he could only continue speaking. That said something about that twinkle irked him off. So are you saying that Rin managed to defeat a Duke-ranked demon? I think so. Scratching the back of his neck, Edward furrowed his brows. When it happened, I was locked inside of a cell, so I don't know exactly what happened, but it appears as though he really did manage to do it. I see. Lowering her head, although brief, Edward saw Amanda's face flash with worry. Dawn. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard a loud shout in the distance. Guildmaster. In the aftermath of the shout, Edward suddenly found himself the focus of everyone's attention as a large building appeared nearby. Turning his eyes away from his daughter, Edward, and locking his sight towards the building in the distance, Edward muttered. Looks like we're here. Clyke. Are you done? Yeah. Glancing Kevin's way, I nodded my head and headed his way. Did you just come back from choosing a skill? Yup. What skill did you choose? Unranked one. Kevin's face twitched. You can do that? As I approached Kevin, I patted his shoulder. You're too humble, Kevin. All you had to do was just ask. Ugh. A distraught look appeared on Kevin's face as his shoulders slumped down. Raising his head a little, he glanced my way and softly whispered. Let me see the skill you chose. You sure? I asked as I turned to look his way. A small change took place in Kevin's face as he took a step back. A look of heavy caution flashed across his face. I suddenly have a feeling that you're up to something. How about you just tell me what the skill is? You don't need to test it against me. Don't worry about it. Extending my head toward his head, I softly smiled. Come, Kevin, let me show you my new skill. Hold up. Nope. By the time Kevin could do anything, I had already pressed my hands against his head. It was at this point that my face became serious. Stop moving. How about no? Shrugging my shoulders, I replied. Because I'm about to use the skill. Don't blame me if something bad happened. Ugh. Letting out a groan, Kevin's face twisted as he eventually gave in. Alright, fine. Good. Visit. For the best no_underscroll_underfruit_underfingy experience. At that instant, I channeled my mana before he could regret his decision, and a faint hue started to sprout out of my hand as he watched. Staring directly into Kevin's eyes, I solemnly said. It shouldn't hurt, but just in case, be prepared to experience some pain. Also, make sure to leave your mind unguarded. Leave my mind, hyuk. In the blink of an eye, I had already activated my skill, and Kevin's eyes went white as his body started spasming. My expression changed a little when I saw this, but I continued to use the skill. It was too late for me to stop. This shouldn't be enough to kill him. There was no way, right? Fortunately, my worries were unfounded. Kevin was much more durable than I thought as I soon let go of his head, and his eyes regained some clarity. H. Supporting himself with his knees, his heavy breathing echoed throughout the corridor. You. As he raised his head, he glared at me as his voice grew groggy. What did you do to me? Instead of answering him, I squinted my eyes and carefully scrutinized his body. Oi, what did you do to M? Cutting him off, I asked. What's your name? Huh. Raising his brows, Kevin looked at me strangely. What's my name? Why are you asking? Shouldn't you already know? Just answer it. Okay. With an extremely confused look on his face, Kevin opened his mouth and answered. Cringe Lord. Placing my hand to cover my mouth, I tried my best to stop my body from trembling as I shook my head and murmured in disappointment. It looks like I failed. You failed? Yeah. My skill didn't work. Really? Cocking his head a little, Kevin's brows furrowed tightly. This is the first time that I've ever heard of a skill not working. Are you really sure that it didn't work? Just to make sure, what's your name? I asked again. To which Kevin answered immediately. Cringed Lord. Pausing for a moment, his head snapped up to look at me. Wait, why are you even asking for my name? Nope, doesn't seem like it worked. Ignoring his words, I shook my head. Then turning around, I slumped my shoulders down and exaggeratedly sighed. I guess I still haven't gotten the hang of my new skill. I'll have to experiment with it more. It was while I was talking that I finally felt a hand pat me on the shoulder. It was Kevin. He had a supportive smile on his face. It's alright, Rin, maybe it actually worked and there is a slight delay. Only time will tell. Yeah. Nodding my head, I gratefully looked at Kevin. Thank you, Cringe Lord. Chapter 547. Memory Manipulation. That was the name of the ranked skill I picked. As implied by the skill's name, the skill enabled me to alter the memories of the people whom I activated the skill against. In the future, this skill would prove to be extremely useful as the possibilities were endless. That being said, it wasn't without faults. There were a couple of drawbacks to the skill. One such drawback was the large amount of mana consumption required to activate the skill. It wasn't a ranked skill for nothing. The deeper the memories that I altered, the greater the mana consumption. In the same way, the more I changed, the more mana I consumed. If it wasn't hard enough already, I could only alter the memories of those who were incapacitated or had their minds unguarded like Kevin not too long ago. So, this was the perfect skill for me at the moment. If possible, I might be able to alter some of my memories from the time that I was back in the monolith. In choosing this skill, my main goal was to solve all the mental issues I had been experiencing ever since I returned from the monolith. They had never stopped and had only gotten worse. It was about time I finally did something to solve this issue, and this skill was probably the key. That said, I did see a problem in this method. What if in the process of changing my memories, my personality also ends up changing? This was a very real problem since my experiences at the monolith were the things that made me who I was today. Thankful, I had a way to restore my memories and therefore could experiment a couple of times. That aside, I should probably call Melissa. In memory of my earlier conversation with Douglas, I skimmed through my contacts until they paused on a particular profile. Melissa Hall. She might be able to help me make an arrangement with Octavius. My chances of getting in touch with him by myself were rather slim considering our situation. Thus, I had no other choice but to call her. H.A. Letting out a long sigh, I pressed on the contact and called Melissa. I might regret this. So bright. With her eyes squinting, Melissa had trouble keeping her eyes open while camera lights flashed before her and shutters clicked all around her. Hic. So annoying. Waving in front of her, Melissa forced herself to smile. We would like to once again congratulate Melissa Hall for her exemplary research on mana dissemination amongst beasts. Thanks to her research, humanity has once again advanced several steps. As expected of her. In the meantime, a loud voice echoed throughout the large auditorium as a man dressed in a black suit handed her a certificate. He was the president of the National Group of Science. The largest scientific community in the human domain. Thank you. With a bright smile, Melissa thanked the president and reached out for the certificate. How much longer do I have to do this for? After taking the paper, Melissa glanced at it casually. It is with great pleasure that I congratulate Melissa Hall for her outstanding capabilities in the field of research and development. Her outstanding achievements over the past year have earned her this award from the National Group of Science, and how useless. Putting on a bright smile, Melissa hugged the certificate to her chest and bowed her head toward the cameras pointed at her. Her actions were followed by the loud clapping sounds of the audience who stood up from their seats to congratulate her. This persisted for 10 minutes before it was finally time for Melissa to finally leave the stage. As she left, she made sure to bow her head one more time and thank the president of the NGS. A bright smile adorned her face the entire time. Finally, once Melissa left the stage, her smile vanished from her face. Waiting for her at the end of the stage was Rosie, who immediately jumped at the opportunity to congratulate her. In her hands was a large stack of papers. Congratulations. Take it. Shoving the certificate to Rosie, Melissa moodily stormed off the venue. Wah. Quickly losing her balance, Rosie quickly hooked her hand over the papers and supported the bottom with her thigh. Wait up. Hastily putting the certificate on top of the stack of papers, Rosie followed her from behind. Melissa, why are you leaving so early? I heard that there is an after part. Not interested. Melissa snappily replied. As if she would want to participate in a party filled with perverted old men that leered at her with every chance they got. But it is a great chance to make great connections. I don't need them. I have plenty already. Upon turning the corner, Melissa entered the venue's lobby. As Melissa gazed around, her eyes soon landed on the enormous glass doors in the distance. Soon, her eyes caught sight of the large car waiting outside and she started walking toward it immediately. Welcome, young miss. Upon exiting the building, a man dressed in black stepped out of the vehicle and opened the door for her. Melissa glanced at him briefly before entering the car and crossing her legs. Click. Wait for me, young miss. Moments after she entered the car, entering from the other side was Rosie. She looked rather tired as she still held onto the large stacks of papers. Briefly glancing at her, Melissa nudged her with her head. Get in, I don't have more time to waste. Oh, okay. Carefully putting the papers beside her, Rosie put on her seatbelt. Knock. Knock. A knock on the glass door signaled the driver to start the car. Within a few seconds, the car had disappeared into the distance. The next few minutes were spent in uncomfortable silence as Melissa stared at the ever-changing scenery outside of the car. In the midst of the silence, on a sharp turn, one of the papers fell down toward Melissa's lap. It was the certificate of today's achievement. Visit for the best no_fruit_g experience. NGS National Award Certificate. With a clench of her teeth, Melissa crumbled the paper in her hand before throwing it away. Useless. That was all she thought as she stared at the reward. Rather than feeling any sense of accomplishment from it, all she felt was disgust. Young miss, I don't think you should throw away your reward. Lowering her body, Rosie carefully picked up the certificate and unwrinkled it. There are many people out there that would be very envious of your reward. They can have it for all I care. Melissa replied as she continued to stare at the ever-changing scenery outside. A low whisper escaped her lips as her eyes closed for a moment. It's not like anyone else cares anyways. To others, such achievements would have been their greatest accomplishments in their life, but to Melissa, it was just like any other reward out there. One of many and one that nobody else she knew cared about. It would be more accurate to say that no one in her family knew she had won the award, and even if they did, they would most likely not even care. The world was ruled by strength. In her family, science and technology were considered nothing but a waste of time. Had it not been for her father's influence, Melissa would have probably already been thrown out of her house. Even then, it wasn't as though her own parents liked her. I don't think it's a waste of time. Rosie's voice echoed inside the car. Finally unwrinkling the whole paper, she carefully placed it on top of the stack of papers. Just because your family doesn't accept the fact that you are a scientist, doesn't mean that there are people out there that don't accept you for who you. Shut up. Brushing her hair behind her ear, Melissa glared at Rosie from the corner of her eyes. Don't talk about them. You will only end up souring my already bad mood. Opening her mouth, Rosie stared at Melissa for a good couple of seconds before she nodded her head. As you wish. As the two sat in silence following her words, a tense atmosphere permeated the car. Ring. Ring. Breaking the silence was the sound of Melissa's phone ringing. Furrowing her brows, Melissa took out her phone and looked at the user ID. Rindover. Oh fuck. Unable to keep herself from swearing, Melissa's face twisted as she stared at the user ID. This was probably the last person that she wanted to talk to at the moment. However, as she considered her options, she realized that ignoring Ren would only lead to him calling her through other means. He was as persistent as a fly. Ugh. With a groan, she picked up the phone. What is it? Melissa. My favorite money-making Maki. Melissa. How have you been? He was about to say money-making machine, wasn't he? Clenching her phone tightly, Melissa forced a smile. Visit for a better user experience. I was doing great until you called me. Now I'm doing terribly. Thank you so much. You have my condolences. Alright, what is it? Spit it out, I don't have time to waste. Straight to the point. This is why I like you, Melissa. Shut up and speak. While covering her hand with her face, Melissa tried to remain composed. You can do it, you can do it. Okay, I need your help setting up a meeting with your dad. I can't do it, I can't do it. Firming her grip on the phone, It took all of her willpower to not open the window and tear it away. Opening her mouth, she irritably asked, "Tell me you're joking, right? Do you have any idea who my father is?" Sadly I do. And that's why I'm asking you to help me set up a meeting with him. Disguise it as you have a meeting with him, but instead, it will be me who will go. That's the dumps." Halfway through her sentence, Melissa's mouth stopped moving. Wait a second. It was at that moment that Melissa suddenly recalled something, and it was the fact that her father hated Ren with a passion. If I pretend to set up a meeting with my father, but instead have Ren go. Once her thoughts passed there, the edges of her lips curled upwards as her hand started trembling. Taking a deep breath to calm herself down, Melissa asked, "Is the meeting very important?" "Very." Ren replied in a very serious tone. "Ha." Letting out an exaggerated sigh, Melissa pretended to fall into deep thought before asking, "What do I get in exchange for setting up a meeting between you and my father?" "By eternal love." Melissa's mouth twitched. "This fucker. I'm hanging up." Wait. It was then that Ren's rushed voice echoed from the speakers of the phone. Pretending to be irritated, Melissa spoke. "Make it quick, I don't have time for your jokes." "Hey. Check your messages." Ding. Ding. Just as those words escaped his mouth, Melissa's phone rang twice. Surprised, Melissa lowered it and checked her messages. She was soon able to see 2 attachments in the message sent to her by Ren. Opening them up, her eyes opened widely. What they? Chapter 548. Within the confines of a dark room, a sinister voice echoed. "He is never wrong. Make sure you keep your guard up. Don't ever let anything happen to what you've built, or else I'll make sure to end you in the most painful way possible." Understood. Malik al-Shayatin nodded in agreement while standing behind an oval circle that hovered in the air before him. "I will make sure to thoroughly search the monolith. Make it quick. The faster you remove this liability, the better for you." Understood. Malik al-Shayatin, or better known as Hemlock Farer as Malik al-Shayatin was merely a title, once again nodded. In response, the sinister voice grew a bit livelier. Its satisfaction was evident. "As expected of my contractee. You are an obedient one." In response to the praise, Hemlock merely lowered his head. "Your Highness, I have something to report." "Speak." "I am close to breaking through." I figured that much." "How long will it take for you to break through?" "Half a year to a year." Hemlock answered as his voice grew deeper and his eyes turned a shade of red. "Around the same time when the contract with the Union ends." When Hemlock thought about the Union, he suddenly felt a powerful force surge through his body. Humanity's traitors. He saw them as such. People who pretended to be doing this for humanity, when they were in fact doing the exact opposite. They were the reason why humanity was on the verge of extinction. "It sounds like you will achieve a breakthrough within the next year or two, huh? Then you better make sure you sort out all your problems in the monolith now." Squinting, Hemlock solemnly replied. "Understood." After his words, the black circular void appeared to slowly dissipate. "You better not let me down." Those were the last words Hemlock heard before the voice completely vanished. In the wake of that, Hemlock stood still and closed his eyes, enveloping the room in an eerie silence. He remained in this state for half an hour before he opened his eyes and turned to face the door. "Come in." He spoke in a cold tone that echoed throughout the room. As the voice sounded, the door opened to reveal an obscure figure that hid behind the shadows of the room. Leader. Through the large windows at the end of the room, moonlight filtered into the room and illuminated the figure as it stepped into space. Everblood. Recognizing the figure that had just come in, Hemlock's eyes squinted. Could he be the Cancer that His Highness was talking about? While carefully examining the figure before him, Hemlock became uncertain. Realistically speaking, it was unlikely that Everblood was the Cancer within the organization. Setting aside the fact that he was a demon, he had also made a lot of contributions to the monolith. Why would anyone who had made so many contributions to the monolith be the Cancer that His Highness was talking about? Especially since he was tied down to the organization by a contract. Did he not value his life? I should still not let my guard down. Regardless, despite how unlikely it seemed that Everblood was the Cancer within the organization, Hemlock was not going to let his guard down. With his eyes glued to Everblood, he spoke. "What is the reason for your sudden visit?" "I have something to report." Everblood curtly replied. The very edges of his lips were curled upwards, giving Hemlock a rather unsettling feeling. Something to report? What is it? We have a new rank in our midst. He has broken through successfully. Oh. Raising his brows, Hemlock's body relaxed a little. Someone has broken through? This is good news. Who broke through? It's Rhinestone. Oh. Hemlock's joy quickly dissipated. Wasn't he the same guy that was brought in by him? Upon reflection, Everblood had gained an impressive amount of influence within the monolith. Even though he didn't have the authority of an elder, his authority within the organization was quite high. The more he thought about it, the more concerned Hemlock became. It wasn't just Everblood that he was concerned about. In his mind, Hemlock was considering all the monolith members and who was the biggest threat at the moment. Leader. Jolting him out of his thoughts was Everblood's voice. Turning his head to glance at him, Hemlock calmly nodded his head. A small smile spread across his face. That is good news. I will personally go and visit him in a while to congratulate him. I understand. Nodding respectfully, Everblood lowered his head. If there is nothing else, I will. Wait. Putting his hand over Everblood's shoulder, Hemlock stopped him before he could leave. A confused look crossed Everblood's face as he turned his head. Yes. What is your goal? Goal. The confusion on Everblood's face grew as he met Hemlock's gaze. With a nod of his head, Hemlock continued. I'm curious, do you have any aspirations? What do you wish to achieve in the monolith? What do I want to achieve in the monolith? Furrowing his brows and falling into a state of contemplation, Everblood eventually shook his head. As a demon, we don't have the luxury of having any aspirations. I am only following orders. Following orders, huh? Hemlock stared deeply at Everblood as he listened to his words, seemingly trying to discern his true intentions. I see, It was only after a while that he let go of Everblood's shoulders and nodded to himself. You're just following orders. That makes sense. Indeed. For someone as weak as Everblood, he couldn't afford something like an aspiration. At most, his desire was to climb the rankings. If I may be presumptuous, why are you asking me this? It was then that he heard Everblood's voice. In the moonlight that spilled from the glass window, Hemlock turned to glance at him and placed his hands behind his back. After that, he calmly walked toward the windows of the room. As he paused in front of the window, the moonlight perfectly accentuated his otherworldly features. Opening his mouth, he asked, Are you aware of why I became the leader of the monolith? His voice echoed throughout the room. Responding to him, Everblood shook his head. No. With his back still facing him, Hemlock lifted his head up to gaze at the moon. After a short silence, he answered. My aspiration is to save humanity. In the wake of his words, Everblood's complexion changed slightly as a heavy silence engulfed the room. Pardon? Did you just say that you joined the monolith because you wanted to save humanity? You didn't hear wrong. With a shake of the head, Hemlock asked a question. In your opinion, what are the chances of humanity winning over demonkind? Not even 1%. Everblood's answer was rather direct, leaving no room for doubt. It prompted Hemlock's lips to curl upward. My thoughts are the same as yours. Outstretching his hand toward the moon to block the moonlight, Hemlock slowly opened his mouth. They may not understand what I'm doing, but they will soon realize that my actions are all performed for the sake of humanity not going extinct. They may call me a tyrant, but I don't care. My conscience is clear. Magically, the moonlight dispersed as he clenched his hand. I can only open their eyes and make them realize that the only way for humanity to continue existing is to join hands with the demons. Fighting against the inevitable is futile. It will only lead to humanity's imminent extinction. What I'm doing is saving our race from extinction. Hemlock's voice darkened after a short pause. While they may see me as a villain at the moment, they will proclaim me the savior of humanity in the future. The latest studies are on website. Your statement makes sense, leader. With his gaze locked on Hemlock's back, Everblood's voice echoed throughout the room. Your actions are truly praiseworthy. Instead of letting humanity perish at the hands of the demons, you are trying your best to save them by making them join our cause. If that's not a hero, then what is? I'm glad you understand me. Turning his head around to stare at Everblood, Hemlock smiled. I might not be recognized for what I'm doing now, But once humanity faces extinction, they will understand my actions. They will understand why I did what I did. Breaking news. After disappearing for over 4 years, Edward Stern, the guild leader of the Demon Hunter Guild, makes a shocking appearance. Many have speculated that his disappearance had to do with some sort of accident, but we are now learning that he was simply on a journey to find a way to break through to rank. Speculations have it that he is on the verge of breaking through to that level, making him the 17th ranker. This is problematic. Turning off the holographic device in front of him, Jean sat back on his chair. His brows tightly knit together as he fell into deep contemplation. He had to show up just when we were catching up to them. It had been quite a while since he had taken over Starlight Guild, and although he hadn't done anything major yet, the guild was thriving more than ever. It had gotten to the point where they finally managed to get close to the level of the Demon Hunter Guild. In any case, I shouldn't worry too much. Grandpa is also not too far from breaking through to the next level. This is only a slight setback. Pressing his hands against the desk, Jean slowly got up from his seat. Stretching his back and neck, Jean took out his daggers. Caressing the body of the dagger, his eyes sharpened. I wonder how much stronger he got. It had been quite a while since Jean had last seen Ren. A year or so. And despite all of his responsibilities, Jean had not once stopped training. Not only that, coupled with all the resources provided to him by the guild, Jin's rate of progress had drastically increased. Not long ago he had finally managed to break through to rank. This was unfathomable for someone his age. In spite of that, Jean was not satisfied. There was a simple reason for this, and it was the fact that he knew Rin was most likely still a notch or two above him. He was a wall that Jean saw no hope in climbing over. In spite of all this, Jean didn't once find himself hopeless or depressed. Rather, it only reinvigorated his urge to train more. What matters isn't how fast one climbs, but who climbs the highest. Such was his thinking as he put his daggers down. Ring. Just as he was about to leave for training, Jean suddenly heard the sound of his phone ringing. Pressing onto the table, a holographic image formed in front of him. What is it? I'm in. Young master, you have a guest. He is currently waiting in the guest room. Cutting Jean off was a female voice. It was his assistant. A guest. Furrowing his brows, he swiped the holographic image to display the camera of the guest rooms. Moments after he swiped his hand, his eyes opened up a little as he recognized the individual waiting in the guest room. It was none other than Rin. Speak of the devil. Turning his attention back to the holographic projection, Jean spoke up. Let him in. Chapter 549. So? Following Jean from behind, I looked around me. Even though I wasn't entirely certain where we were, a glance at the room told me we were in a training room. Its design was reminiscent of Amanda's training room back in the Demon Hunter Guild. Just a simple and clean white room. With large windows on each side of the room, the space was about half the size of a football pitch, making it quite a large space to train. Take it. As I stood there watching Jean, a sword suddenly swung in my direction. A curious look crossed my face as I instinctively grabbed the sword. What's going on? Let's spar for a minute. Jean replied as he took off his blazer and dropped it on the ground. Wah! Before I could even argue against him, his figure vanished and an airborne metallic sound rang out as I swung my sword toward the right side of my body. Clank! It was at that moment that Jin's figure reappeared. He wore a look of utter seriousness as his eyes fixed themselves on the point of contact between my sword and his daggers. Staring at him, I asked, "What are you doing?" Getting a better understanding of our gap. Hearing his words, I had a strange thought. Getting a better understanding of our gap? Does he think of me as his rival or something? What? Why? Immediately following his words, and just as I was about to speak, his figure disappeared. In this instance, he appeared on the other side of my body. There was a noticeable difference in his speed this time. The speed was so fast that I was left shaken for a split second. Fast. To the naked eye, it appeared as if he had teleported. Even so, the rank difference between Jean and me was quite big. It wasn't difficult for me to dodge his daggers, as all it took was a simple movement of my head. Swoosh. Still feeling the sharpness and speed of the daggers, I immediately grew apprehensive. His mastery of daggers is insane. He probably had a greater master over me with the sword. Tisk. A click of his tongue caused Jin's figure to disappear for the third time. In the midst of this movement, I noticed a sharp dagger head pointing straight at me. Swoosh. But just like before, I was able to easily dodge his attack. Following the path of the dagger, my brows furrowed a little bit as I opened my mouth and asked, "Are you satisfied?" Instead of answering, Jin once again disappeared. This time he reappeared right behind me as I felt the sharp tip of his dagger head for the back of my head. Dangerous, I thought as my eyes sharpened. As opposed to his previous attacks, this one felt far more dangerous. In addition to its speed, it felt more terrifying because of its hidden power. It was akin to a move from an rank individual. As I rotated my body, I twisted the heel of my foot. Huh. Upon turning my body, I was struck by a series of black threads that sprung forth from the ground, encircling my entire body and halting my movement. Shit. It was at this movement that I finally realized the severity of my situation as Jin's dagger continued to head my way. All of this happened within a fraction of a second, and before I knew it, his dagger was only inches away from the back of my head. Clenching my teeth, I muttered, "Come out." Within an instant of saying those words, I saw a black shadowy figure appear in front of me. Immediately after that, Jin's dagger struck its head, and half of the mana inside my body disappeared just like that. The latest understudies are on website. Jin's face was flushed with surprise as she watched the shadowy figure disappear into thin air. Taking advantage of the moment, I distanced myself from him by pressing my foot against the ground. As I brushed my hair up, I complained, Oi, you can't just pull such moves without even warning me." There was a moment when I thought my head might fall off. Without a doubt, that was his strongest technique. Do your enemies warn you when they attack you? No. Then what's the problem? In my attempt to refute his words, I was only able to curse myself inwardly once I realized I was unable to do so. He has a point, damn it. Although you have a point, you could also argue that I was here to meet a friend. Someone that I didn't think would attack me the moment they saw me. Without saying anything, Jin put his daggers away. I was left a bit surprised by his actions. Wait, didn't you want to spar? If you want, I can still go a couple of rounds. I'm good. Jin answered as he picked up his jacket from the ground and put it on. I'm already satisfied with what I've seen. Tilting my head to the side, I grew curious. I'm curious. What exactly did you see? Our gap. Jin indifferently answered as he slowly fixed his tie and shirt. And what? Our gap, what did you see? Turning his head to glance at my eyes, though faint, the edges of his lips curled up a bit. After that, he turned around and headed out of the training ground. Hey, wait, you didn't answer. From behind, I threw the sword on the ground and followed him. Yet, despite my persistent pestering, he continued to ignore me. This continued all the way until we made it to his office. Are you seriously not going to answer me? Sitting down on his sofa and making myself at home, I glared in his direction. It would have been nice for you to at least tell me this much after you suddenly took me to a training ground and assaulted me out of nowhere. After putting his gray blazer behind his chair, Jin sat down and asked, So, what is the purpose of your visit? Are you just going to continue ignoring my words? Yes. Jin nodded his head. Tisk. Clicking my tongue, I leaned back on my chair and crossed my legs. Leaning my head against my hand, I went straight to the point. How long can you be away from the guild? A confused look filled Jin's face as he tilted his head to look at me. After a while he answered, It depends. Let's say a month. Do you think your guild will let you leave for a month? Visit for a better user experience. A month. With a thoughtful look on his face, Jin shook his head. A month would be too long. I'm currently handling a couple of important deals, so I won't be able to afford such a long break. What sort of deals are they? Confidential. Lowering my head while covering my mouth with my hand, I thought to myself, should I just kidnap him? This seemed to be the best option at the moment. Although there were alternatives to Jin at the moment, it wasn't so much for his skills that I needed him, but it was more for his profession that would make things a lot easier for Kevin and me. Snapping me out of his thoughts was Jin's voice as he asked, Why are you even asking me this? Lifting my head up a little, I honestly replied, Kevin and I will be going on an important mission and we thought of bringing you with us. A mission? Yeah. I nodded my head. It's quite dangerous, however. It is also a great opportunity for us to train. Deeply staring into my eyes, Jean didn't answer as his brows furrowed tightly. After a while, pressing onto the table, a series of holographic images appeared before him. Scrolling through the contents, his hand eventually stopped on a particular file. The frown on his face deepened as he looked at the file. Pinching his fingers to enlarge the file, Jean opened his mouth and asked, "When exactly are you planning on going?" "By the end of the week," I replied. Since I had a lot of things to do before leaving, I decided to leave with Kevin by the end of the week. The frown on Jin's face deepened as he heard my words. "For a month." "Not sure. It depends on how fast we can finish everything. It might even be less than that, to be honest. Could even be as fast as 1 day. Scratching the side of his neck, Jean closed his eyes and pressed onto the holographic device to shut it down. He then shook his head. "I don't think I can go." "How sure are you of this?" "Fairly certain." "I see. Kidnapping it is." "Can I ask why?" With a difficult look on his face, Jean answered. "To answer truthfully, my grandpa is going to break through any time soon now, and I don't think I can afford to leave." "All right." Massaging my forehead, I slowly nodded my head and stood up. "I won't force you to come. However, if you do change your mind, you can call me before the end of the week." "Okay," Jean replied with a nod. Raising my head to wave in his direction, I headed out of his office. "It was nice chatting with you. I'll see you later. The latest episodes are on website." "Sure." I then opened his office door and walked straight out. Click. Jin's eyes lingered in the direction of where Rin had left as a heavy silence descended in the room. Only after a few moments did Jin let out a sigh. As expected, the gap between us is still huge. On the outside, it looked like he held the advantage throughout the fight. However, only Jin himself knew just how easily Rin had defended his attacks. Even the casual manner in which he had defended his attacks gave Jin an indication of the distance between them. Additionally, the last attack he executed was one he devised to win any 1v1 match. To have defended against it somehow, Rin. I guess I'll have to train harder. It was a harsh reality and Jin could only adapt to it. Tapping onto the holographic device, Jin got back to work. Scrolling through his emails, his eyes paused on a certain email before he shook his head and leaned back against his chair. "What a pity," Jin murmured as he covered his eyes with his arm. It really was a pity that he couldn't go. The excuse about his grandfather was a lie. The reality was that Edward's sudden appearance alarmed him. For all guilds in the human realm, his sudden appearance brought great turmoil, and Jin could already foretell the troubles that were to come in the near future. The mere thought of it gave Jin a headache. It's so annoying. A couple of hours later, Kaisa headquarters. Use whatever means possible to check Jin's schedule. Report to me if he has anything important to do over the next month or so. Understood. Faced directly with Small Snake, I inquired about Jin's schedule for the month. Normally this wouldn't have been possible, but I trusted Small Snake and Ryan had the means to make it happen. Particularly Ryan, who was now very adept at hacking systems. As for Jin, his excuse about his grandfather almost breaking through was bullshit. There was no doubt about this. Given everything that had happened, it was most likely that he was concerned about Edward's future actions now that he was back. Assuming that was the case, I could just tell Edward to not touch the Starlight Guild and after that kidnap Jin without any problems. Is there anything else? A look at Small Snake snapped me out of my thoughts. Taking a moment to think, I shook my head at him. I'm good. All right. As Small Snake stood from his seat, he waved his hand and left the office in a lazy manner. If you need anything from me, you can just ask me. It wasn't long after he left that a tranquil silence engulfed the place. Nevertheless, someone soon knocked on the door, interrupting the silence. Knock. Knock. Come in. In anticipation of who was about to arrive, a smile spread across my face. Click. Excuse me. On the other side of the door, a familiar figure appeared. In an instant I recognized him. Why wouldn't I? Recruiting him had been on my mind for quite some time, and I knew that he was the key to improving my physique. As I rose from my desk, I smiled. It's been some time since we last met, Han Yufei. Chapter 550. So this is the Martial Manual? As I slowly opened the pages of the book in front of me, I stared carefully at the words on the pages. It was then that I noticed that it wasn't only filled with words but images as well. In each image was a depiction of a different stance. Body hardening, mind-spirit connection, martial body. Pointing at them, I raised my head to look at Han Yufei. I've already seen what martial body does, and I already have an idea of what body hardening is. What about mind-spirit connection? What is that? Mind-spirit connection? Leaning forward, Han Yufei pointed at a certain illustration that depicted a person sitting cross-legged with their arms linked together right towards the abdomen area. By mastering the martial manual, your mind will become more connected to your body. To sum it up in modern terms, it will improve your ability to connect with your brain, thereby enabling you to react more quickly. Ah, I see. Listening to his words, I came to a sudden understanding. In short, my reaction time will drastically increase once I reach a certain point of my mastery. That's pretty useful. This skill perfectly complemented Eyes of Kronos. Even though it wouldn't solve my problem of being unable to move at the same rate as my eyes were seeing things, it could still prove to be a life-saving skill in the future. Not bad. Flipping through the pages of the manual for the next minute, I eventually closed it. All right. This is good. It was exactly what I wanted. In fact, even better. Putting the book away, I took out a key from my dimensional space and opened the drawer next to me. Opening the drawer, I took out a small file. Taking out the file and scanning through its contents, I nodded in satisfaction. As expected of Small Snake. He has done his task beautifully. Done checking the files, I slid the papers onto the desk. Toward Han Yufei, who pointed at them and asked. This. By other end of the deal. You mean? Yeah. With a nod of my head, I opened the file in front of Han Yufei. The location of the 5-star sword art that I promised. Han Yufei's eyes immediately widened after this as he dragged the file toward him. For the next couple of minutes, he carefully looked through the information on the files. As time passed, the greater the surprise on his face. This is the place where the sword art is located? It is. I nodded my head. It's not exactly in the human domain, however, considering that the relationship between us and the other races has improved, you won't have to worry too much about secretly entering their territory. The location where the Gravar style was located was actually in the Orson domain. A place that was located not far off from one of the 4 great cities. It is going to be quite difficult to collect. Han Yufei muttered after a while as he continued to observe the files in front of him. With a shrug of my shoulders, I replied. It's a 5-star sword art. What do you expect? If 5-star sword arts were so easy to get, everyone would have them. Actually, now that I think about it, collecting the Keiki style was quite easy. The same could be argued for the Levi Shah style. The only thing that was hard about them was the fact that they were extremely hidden. Other than that, in terms of difficulty, they really weren't much. Could this be a coincidence? I didn't know. Regardless. Well, like I've said before, the relationship between us and the other races is much better. Furthermore, now that we have portals, it should pose no trouble for you to go there and come back within the day. Had it been in the past, the task would have been incredibly hard. Nevertheless, times had changed. We now had portals, and entering the Orson territory was no longer stuff of the past. True. Han Yufei also seemed to have realized this as his brows relaxed. Closing the paper down, he slowly stood up from his seat. I'll send this back to my clan. If we truly can find the 5-star sword art, then I will have no problem agreeing to what you previously asked. All right. Leaning back on my chair, I faintly smiled. Just remember to not piss off the orcs on your way to collecting the sword art and you should be fine. Will do. Pressing his hands on the armrest of the chair, Han Yufei put the files away and stood up. After that, he cupped his fist in my direction. Many thanks for your help. No problem. I replied while waving my hand. The both of us had benefited from this deal, and the Gravar style was quite useless to me anyway. I will be taking my leave. Cupping his hands one more time, Han Yufei turned around and headed for the door. Staring at his back, I suddenly recalled something as my face changed. Wait. I called out. Halting his movements, Han Yufei slowly turned around. He had a rather confused look on his face. In no way bothered by this, my face became extremely solemn. Yes. Han Yufei asked as his face similarly turned serious. My sudden shift in demeanor must have caught him off guard. You. Deeply staring into his eyes, I opened my mouth and asked. How high is your charm? Does anybody in the class know why one must coat their weapons with mana? Kevin's voice echoed throughout a large auditorium that was filled with over 100 students who were all attentively listening to his lecture. This brings back memories. A smile would involuntarily plaster Kevin's face every time he reminded himself of his student days back in the past. Anyone? Visit for a better user experience. Scanning the classroom with his eyes, they soon paused toward a certain student. He had a rather thin frame with an oval cut and circular thin-framed glasses. Jackson. Kevin called out as he recognized him instantly. How could he not when he was the brightest student in his class? Although he wasn't as adept at physical training compared to the others in terms of brains, he was a step ahead of the others. Yes. Upon rising from his seat, all eyes fell on the student who hid his face in front of the book in his hands. Opening his mouth, he started to speak with a slight stutter in his voice. Owen, swore Professor Voss's question. Users quote their man. Wait a second. Halfway through his sentence, Kevin couldn't help but interrupt him as his brows furrowed tightly. Feeling Kevin's gaze paused on him, Jackson's face paled slightly. Taking a serious look at him, Kevin asked. What did you just call me? Jackson's face paled even more at the question as his hands started to shake. However, as he felt Kevin's stern gaze fall on him, he weakly opened his mouth and replied. It's Professor Voss. Professor Voss? The frown on Kevin's face deepened. Is that some sort of nickname that the students have created for me? But what exactly is a Voss? After a while he shook his head. Turning his attention back to Jackson, Kevin signaled him to sit back down. Sit back down for now. Yes. Following Kevin's instructions, Jackson quickly sat back down on his seat. Once he sat down, Kevin's eyes swept toward all of the students before he raised his voice. I don't know if this is a common thing among you guys, but I would like it for all of you to refrain from making strange nicknames for me. I have a name. Turning around, Kevin took a piece of chalk and walked toward the blackboard at the very end of the classroom. Something that was rarely used in this day and age. I may have been too nice to my students. So much so that they've started taking liberties with me. I need to quickly change this. When Kevin arrived at the blackboard, he scribbled something down. But once he was done writing, Kevin pointed at the board. Make sure you remember my name. It is not Voss or whatever you guys have made up. It's Cringe Lord, or to be precise, Professor Lord. Putting down the chalk, he looked at the students who all wore a dumbfounded expressions on their faces. Make sure you remember that. The next day, as the sun poured directly down on my body, I squinted my eyes and carefully surveyed my surroundings. Then lowering my head to glance at my watch and check the location, I muttered. If I'm not wrong, this should be the place. Checking one more time to see that I was in the right place, I eventually let out a sigh of relief and sat down on one of the benches in the park that I was in. Not so far from where I was sitting, I could hear the sound of water gushing echoing throughout the air as a fountain stood not far from where I was. The water glistened under the sunlight. Ring. Ring. It was at that moment that my phone vibrated inside of my pocket. Again. With a sigh, I took out my phone. Upon unlocking my phone, I was bombarded with a series of text messages and missed call logs. Sad face Kevin Voss. Kevin, I will kill you. You have missed a call. Kevin, answer my calls, you scum. I know what you did. You don't have to pretend that you don't know. You have missed a call. You have missed a call. Kevin, don't ignore me. Kevin, you lied to me about the skill not working. You have missed a call. Kevin, I swear to God. You will pay for what you did. Sad face Kevin Voss. What a drama queen. Putting my phone away and turning off the ringer, I leaned back on the bench and relaxed. Rather than laughing, my expression turned serious. As expected. For one to figure out whether their memories have been manipulated or not, the environment around them is very important. Leaving aside the fact that Kevin deserved this, I had another goal in changing his name. I wanted to test the limits of this skill. In order to determine whether the person under the influence of the skill would notice that their memories had been altered instead of rejecting reality wholeheartedly, I had Kevin be my lab rat. Needless to say, the experiment proved successful. Instead of still believing that his name is Cringe Lord, once Kevin realized that things were wrong, he was able to quickly determine that his mind had been altered instead of denying reality. This was useful information and, leaning back on my chair, the edges of my lips curled up a bit. As expected, this might be the skill that the other me used in order to alter my memories. I had a hunch when I selected it, but upon seeing the result of the experiment, this seemed more and more plausible. So beautiful. Is she a celebrity? Wow. Suddenly, jolted out of my thoughts, I saw a crowd gathering as people gazed into the distance. In their line of sight, I saw a familiar face. A soft smile spread on my face once I recognized the figure. She's here. With a black skirt that nearly reached her knees paired with black leggings, and wearing a soft white turtleneck shirt to complement her glossy black hair tied in a ponytail behind her back, Amanda walked gracefully through the park grounds as her appearance caught everyone's attention. This was especially so for the males who couldn't help but blush at her sight. As Amanda halted her steps in the middle of the park, she took a moment to take in the surroundings. In addition to her quiet and collected demeanor, her manner further enhanced her image to those around her as some of the people around her unknowingly found their heads tilt toward her direction as they walked. So beautiful. Who is she? Visit. For the best no_underfruit_g experience. But it was at that moment, that time seemed to have stopped for everyone around her. Gaze paused in my direction and a smile blossomed on her face. It was a smile that seemed to dazzle the whole world as everyone around her dropped whatever they were doing and just stared at her, fully immersed in her smile. Not long after, the crisp and pleasant sound of her voice echoed throughout the air. Ring.